Hi, and welcome back to the Shane Plays Let's Play, or not Let's Play, the Out of the Abyss Notes series as myself and my group continue to work through Out of the Abyss, the Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition Underdark adventure, mega adventure campaign, really. So, when we last left our intrepid heroes, they were trapped in the Oozing Temple, which was A, running out of air, and filling up with water. And also, they had encountered a sentient gelatinous cube, which is unusual in its own, but what they don't know is that due to Jubilexes, who's one of the demon lords, he's like the demon lord of fungus or whatever, his influence in the Underdark has caused um, Glabagul, who they're calling Glab for short, to attain sentience, awareness. So he doesn't appear evil. He's just kind of like, hey, what's going on? He's kind of a blank slate, very curious. Um, could possibly, you know, be a threat under certain circumstances, but not a threat, right off the bat. So, as should be expected, Globagul is getting a lot of attention from the characters. The players are very interested in Glab, as you will, Glab. That's what they're calling him, Glab. Um, there's a lot of interest in him. Um, one of the a couple of there's two real life brothers that play in the game, and one of the brothers just went back to college, so not this week, but the week before. It was his last week, and he had gotten some eye stalks off of a spectator weeks back, and had been using the wizard had been casting Ray of Frost, and he's a tinkerer, so they contrived this contraption between that and Ray of Frost to keep them from rotting. Um, and he wants to make armor for for Glab or Glob, like to cover all of Glob except the bottom face of Glob, so the Glob can be in the armor and still move. And then he wants to put the eye stalks on, and then set atop Glabagul and ride him into battle. So, yay players! They're always going to come up with cool stuff. So, which I doubt that that's ultimately what's going to happen, but the imagery of that is fantastic. So, um, they're not, even though I keep reminding them, they don't seem to be getting their heads around the fact that the gelatinous cube's movement rate is 15 feet per round, so he's not very fast. So you wouldn't exactly be charging; you'd be kind of oozing into battle. But anyway, let's not confuse the situation with facts. Um, so the other thing about Glabagul is I had a player approach me privately. Um, he's like, given the alignments of the characters in the party, what is the morality of them teaching Glabagul about fighting and killing? And it's actually a pretty interesting discussion, because the session last time, they'd gotten into a fight with a gray ooze, and Glob's like, "What happened? Why did y'all do that?" And they're very clear that the gray ooze attacked us, so in defense, we attacked the gray ooze. So I kind of talked with the character offline, even though it was an online conversation, ironically, outside of the game, and I explained my thoughts were, well, even a lawful good character will fight if necessary. If the conditions are correct, fighting is what you do. Self-defense is, of course, not only in the game but in real life, not considered immoral. So we had a pretty good discussion on that, and I think that there's two concerns that this player has. One, generally in game, they're really considering what's the morality of teaching a blank slate creature that's basically kind of a child about fighting. And then two, also, I don't, for the game, I don't think he wants the gelatinous cube tagging along with the party. Because he's like, oh, we had this dragon egg situation where they wanted to keep the dragon egg and this and that and that. And, I can kind of see all that. What I said is, as the DM, I said, I understand the points you're making, and it's a really fascinating discussion, but I've got to remain neutral. I mean, if the party wants to take Glab with them, assuming that they survive this temple and that Glab survives and all that, and they want to take Glab with them, and Glab wants to go with them, you know, that's storytelling. I personally would not want a creature that size and that has that inherent dangerousness to it, even if it's not going to be attacking me. And that speed, I wouldn't want it with me, to be honest. But, you know, if the party wants that, you know, we'll role play that. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes. I think all they're thinking, the majority of the party is, oh, this is really neat. We have an intelligent gelatinous cube that seems to be on our side, and we're just having fun with that. I don't think they're thinking the long term, you know, as we're traveling from city to city, or if you go into a city or a settlement in the Underdark, you're going to take a gelatinous cube with you. You know, I don't think they're really thinking all that through, but we'll see how it works out. The other interesting thing about Glab was one of the players had, in my opinion, was a very clever idea. This had not occurred to me. Was right at the end of last session, they had found a new section where off to the west were 4 parallel hallways, and immediately to the east was sort of a rough cavern they could go into, and they had discovered that's where, in that cavern, was where there's cracks in the ceiling, and that's where the water's pouring in. So one of the characters introduced an idea that I hadn't considered. I doubt that the writers of Out of the Abyss had considered, and this is totally normal for players to just spring, so you're like, whoa, I hadn't thought of that. And actually, another player had asked me a question that I thought was incredibly clever, and I racked my brain trying to remember what that was so I could share it in this video, and I can't. Hopefully I'll remember it down the road and I can share it. But this other player, and I don't even think it was about Glob. I think it was about, you know, this character or this player had a question about their circumstances and could we try whatever. I was like, man, I don't know if that worked, but that's a really clever idea. And I wish I could remember what that question was. But anyway, so back to the Globagul, we had a character or a player that said, look, the cavern where the water is mainly coming in from, can we ask Globagul to wedge himself in to that opening and block the water? And I was like, well, wow, that's a pretty good idea. So so here's what I kind of ran it through my head, did some quick thinking on it, and I went, okay, so here's the deal. Assuming that he'll agree to do that, or she, I'm guessing gelatinous cubes are asexual, but you know, yes, you will probably block some of the water for a while, but as that pressure builds up, eventually there's going to be so much pressure that it'll push him out and probably pop him out like a cork. So, you know, as I said, so it wouldn't be a permanent solution. You know, and in addition to that, you know, I reminded them you're running out of air. So they were like, okay. So the player, presented this idea to Glob like it was a game. Hey, do you want to play a game with the water? Do you want to put yourself in there and kind of push against him and make it a game? And Glob's like, yeah, okay, sure. And so he kind of wedged himself in there. So I thought that was very clever. I thought that was a cool. So, and it did two things. One, it helped temporarily address the problem of the water pouring in. And two, it kind of got Glab out of the way temporarily while they investigated the hallways and stuff. So I was like, it's a good idea. So anyway, so what else happened after that was, and I'm going to kind of run down really quickly here. The hallways, all of them are rigged with a false floor that'll collapse into a 10-foot pit that has black puddings. So there's one black pudding per hallway. They, of course, they went down a hallway and triggered one. And they specifically said, hey, we're going down the hallway. And they didn't tell me that they were searching. They didn't tell me that they were, being careful. They just said, hey, we're going down the hallway. Okay. And I checked their passive perceptions, and the perception to detect the floor is 15. Neither of their passive perceptions were that high, so they collapsed it. Now, the way these pits work is you get a dexterity save to see if you catch yourself. And then next you get I think a strength save or a strength check to pull yourself out. So long story short, in 2 different hallways they ended up triggering these. In the second one they were looking because they suspected something was up, but the spot check was so awful they still triggered it. Long story short, in both of them they triggered them. The character was able to catch themselves and pull themselves out. But the book states that if the black pudding doesn't, or if somebody doesn't fall in, or if it eats whoever falls in very quickly, it'll come out. So in both cases, the characters were able to pull themselves out. And in the first case, they didn't realize what was in the pit. And I had, after a couple of rounds, I had, what would have been a couple of rounds, we weren't in initiative at that point. Daggers, who's my blind thief and has very good, my blind thief player, I should say, blind rogue. I don't play him. I'm the DM, of course. He has very good hearing, and I allowed him to hear kind of a weird slurping, slithering noise. So he was able to, hey, something's going on. And then, of course, the black puddings kind of starts popping up out of the pit. They ended up fighting 2 black puddings at different times. They destroyed one, and then not long after that, they got into a fight with another one. The interesting things to note, if you're not familiar with black puddings, is they have a lot of immunities and I don't know if they have resistances, but they definitely have just straight out immunities. So you need to pay attention to that. 2, if you hit them with slashing or lightning damage, and they still have at least 10 hit points, they'll split into 2. So you're dealing, and I think it's at least medium size, it'll split into 2. So you can end up having 2 little black puddings that you're fighting. And the third thing is, remember, they're very acidic. So if you're hitting them with normal weapons, those weapons will start dissolving, and after a few hits will lose their potency completely. So keep that in mind. Another thing with the black pudding is, the little pseudopod attack slapped one of my monks up and did a lot of damage. Between the bludgeoning damage and the acid damage, did a lot of damage. And in addition, if you're wearing armor and you get that pseudopod, it can deteriorate the armor. So black puddings can be very, very nasty. Definitely want to, pay attention to all their different descriptions in the monster manual. And okay, so the other thing I want to note is I really thought that the players would get out of the Oozing Temple by this. This is our second session in the Oozing Temple, so roughly 4, maybe a little over 4 hours that we've been in it in game time. I really thought they would make it out, or be right on the verge of making it out at the end of this session. The second black pudding fight added just enough time to the situation, the session, that they didn't make it out of the Oozing Temple at the end of this week's session, not last night's session. So keep that in mind. If you're wanting to get them in and out, if you're running this, because it's an optional encounter, and it's not a random encounter, it's just an encounter you can decide to put them through. If you're wanting to run through it fairly quickly, you may want to adjust how many black puddings they fight, or maybe jack down the amount of hit points that the black puddings have or something, because the black puddings have a lot of hit points too. So another little interesting thing in this area is south of the hallways with the black puddings, there's sort of a round room that has a fountain in there. And there's some little alcoves, sort of niches around this room, and 4 of them have these weird, formless kind of sculptures that are actually gray oozes held in a magical stasis, and if they're touched or attacked, they'll immediately become regular oozes and attack, or not become oozes, they'll become fluid again and attack. So be aware that my party fought one of those, and then was like, yeah, we don't want to mess with the other ones. There's also treasure in the fountain, and there's a broken statue on a pedestal in the middle of the fountain that just has some clawed feet left. And my players kind of really, spend a lot of time on this statue. And it seems to be just a minor description in the details of the room in the book, but it's one of those things that all my players were like, well, do we see any parts of the statue? Can we tell what the statue was? Can we tell what happened to the statue? So I think that they're seizing on this as a possible clue to how to get out of the temple. So just be aware of that. And all I did was read them the basic description, that was in the book, and they really, really kind of seized on that, trying to figure out what was going on, because they're thinking, how do we get out of here? They're running out of air, they're running out of or the water's right. I think by the end of this session, the water's up 4 feet. So even everyone's pretty much in difficult terrain now. There's only 10 feet to the ceiling. At this point, I think I calculated everything, and they're going to run out of volume with the water. Like the water is going to be a problem quicker than running out of air, but they're still running out of air. And you want to track that, how many people there are, how many people are breathing, fighting. There's notes in the book on fighting and how that affects, and how not fighting affects, how there was fire spells thrown last night. There was a torch lit, um, things like that, and that will impact how much air is left. So I personally would recommend, paying pretty good attention to that, because it's this whole water's rising, running out of air, we're trapped, is a very cool dynamic, much cooler than the puddings or this or that. It's a cool dynamic. So that's, I really like this little encounter. In fact, I sent a tweet to Chris Perkins, one of the main writers of this adventure. I said, man, I really like the Oozing Temple and that whole dynamic. So anyway, the way things ended up working out, long story short, they eventually told Glob, "Hey, come on, we're gonna," because they realized, they're like, "Man, we've searched everything, we've looked all around, we don't see a way out here." And there was one little section at the beginning where they hadn't gone east, and they were like, "Well, that must be the way out." So they slogged all the way back there through the water, and they told Glob, said, "Come on with us, Glob." So he popped out. And he had been in there long enough to build up some water, but not this huge tidal wave or anything like that. And they went all the way around back to the beginning of the temple where they came into the little cavern that was to the east, and realized that was a dead end too. And Glob was like, "Hey, there's another one of these things." Every now and then he'll say, "There's a thing around that's like me but not me," and he's referring to like the gray oozes and stuff. And they're like, "Okay." Um, the party was like, "Oh, okay, thanks for letting us know." And I was really kind of implying that, hey, a gray ooze is about to come out of the ceiling, but I wasn't saying that they had to go into combat. So I did it in such a way to let them know that they're starting to see the gray ooze come through the cracks. Um, but I did it in such a way that if they wanted to go ahead and exit the chamber and not mess with the gray ooze, that was fine, and that's what they chose to do. So that's where the session ended. As far as they know, they discovered everything floor plan for this area there is to discover, and they have. There's no secret rooms or anything like that. The way out is the chamber that has the cracks in the ceiling where all the water's pouring in. That's the way out, and you have to go in, and they've got to open up those cracks and kind of collapse it in and swim 30 feet up, and that's how you get out. So I've heard 2 or 3 theories from players. One player is really wanting to focus back on that kind of round room that had the fountain and the broken statue and the little niches. That player is wanting to kind of, let's go check that out again. And then another player mentioned, well, what about the area with all the cracks? Maybe we can kind of open that up. So hopefully they're just making a brilliant conclusion and not just having read the book, because I urge the guy, like, please don't do that. Don't read ahead. So, because that, to me, that's kind of a bit of a conclusion to just jump to, but who knows, people are smart and he could figure it out on his own. I'm not definitely saying that he read ahead. I'm giving him the benefit of it out he didn't, because he's made other pretty brilliant intuitive leaps in the game before. So that's where they're at. They're trying to figure out how to get out. Next session, what I hope to have happen is they get out fairly early in the session, and then they continue towards Neverlight Grove, and I'd like to bring them towards Neverlight Grove at the end of next session and wrap it up there. Say, hey, you're at Neverlight Grove, and then next session we'll do that. So that's what I'm hoping to happen next session. So that's pretty much how things went. It was a fun session. I really like the Oozing Temple. I know I've said that before. I'll say it again. If you're playing this Out of the Abyss adventure with your players, I would definitely at some point have them go into the Oozing Temple. I think it's a lot of fun. It's going to be interesting to see what it ends up happening with Glob. So anyway, I welcome your questions and your comments. I've had a guy, Chris, making some really good comments lately on the videos. He's been going through and watching them all and asking some interesting questions, making some good comments. So I love that kind of stuff. Feel free to comment, ask questions, leave a thumbs up on the YouTube video. Leave it a like. That helps me a lot. And and feel free if you have any, whether you agree with what I'm doing or don't, or have different perspectives. I want to hear from all of that. So anyway, we'll catch you next time. And thanks so much for watching on Champlain.